keep going.
If you want to be on the bleeding edge of this stuff, generally speaking, you have to do it on your own. I have had businesses where I've come extremely close to losing it all. There's been many times where I felt tired and I thought, I need a break from this constancy. It is a very lonely existence.
Hey everyone! So today's episode is very special for us. We've got a chance to get naked with somebody who is recognized as one of the financial industry's biggest and most outspoken influencers. Just as an example, his book Augmented was referred by China's president as recommended reading on artificial intelligence. And how often do we get the folks from the biggest stages who also advise Obama administration to be really raw and open? Well, in this case, we did. Brett King talked to us about being on the bleeding edge with one of his companies, but he also opened up about his marriage and relationship struggles. In his own words, it's a lonely existence on the top. We were curious also about how Brett is training his resilience muscle. So not to spoil too much, but it's heavily about perseverance, continuous belief into your own mission, and also celebrating every small success you have on the journey. So today with Brett King, Australian futurist, Amazon bestselling author, co-founder and CEO of Moven, which is a New York-based mobile banking startup. Brett is also host of a globally recognized radio show, Breaking Banks, with nearly 7 million listeners from 180 countries. Impressive. So enjoy the show.
This is Naked by The Future Fund, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Liolios. And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world. You didn't really start off as an entrepreneur, right? So what makes somebody tick to go, I'm going to do my own thing now? What goes on in somebody's mind, but also in somebody's psyche to go, you know what? I'm going to take that plunge. I'm going to take that risk. I'm going to do my own thing. Because that comes pretty much instantly with all the questions that you might face when you start doing it.
My first experience at entrepreneurship was actually my own software business out of Australia, starting when I was 22. Pretty early on in the process. There were various motivations behind that in terms of why. I had a good, I had a solid career as a coder. I took that sort of unconventional route of not going through university straight out of high school and as a coder. Even at that time, it was fairly unusual, but for various reasons, my parents weren't supportive of me going to university, and so I had to sort of self-fund myself. I had this idea that I could create something that was different and sort of change the world at the time. The vast majority of my career has been as an entrepreneur. In terms of what motivated me to get there, we started Moving in late 2010. And, now I've got a bunch of businesses, like six or seven. I've been an entrepreneur. It's been in my blood most of the time. I don't know quite where I got it from, except that it was a fairly pragmatic decision early on because I wanted flexibility in terms of my working schedule. And
I actually wanted to ask you there because, so this is very obvious. Serial entrepreneur, running parallel lives, wearing a lot of hats. If you come back to the origins, is your background somehow in there influencing your choices in life, like your roots?
Yeah, it is. I was involved in actually at the time. Again, this is something not a lot of people know about me, but I was raised in a fairly conservative religious family, and I was involved in missionary work and stuff like that when I was a younger person. And so the sort of part-time element, or the ability to work when I wanted to, and that working flexibility gave me the time to sort of be involved in these sort of social community issues. And so for a few years, that was I was spending time sort of doing some of that during the day, and then working at night, coding. So there was an element of that, but also, my father was very, very entrepreneurial. He was in sales. I think I got the bug of sort of the entrepreneurship, and I think I got the travel bug from him as well. Because I've always built businesses that have enabled me to travel and see the world as well. And the other thing was, I had one of my other great loves was flying, and so when I was in Australia, I had my pilot's license, and I was looking for a business that I could build that would pay for me to fly and get hours. So it was a lifestyle choice at the time. But of course, once you've been an entrepreneur and you've worked for yourself, as I have for many years, when you go back into a corporate environment, you often can find that structure can be comforting from a perspective, but it also can be limiting.
You draw the comparison between, okay, why would people go corporate and why would people start their own business, right? And the corporate life comes with the comfort of a lot of structure, but it also comes with, I always think that the nice thing about being corporate is you can always blame somebody else for things going wrong, right? As an entrepreneur, the buck stops with you as a business builder, right?
And you also have the flexibility of working 24 hours a day and not getting paid much,
It's beautiful.
Why would you go into corporate when you could do that?
But what is it that makes you go, it's painful, it's hard work, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of hours, and ultimately I don't relax, but I still want to do this, and I would still choose this over the comfort and the structure and everything else, and especially when you start realizing how different all these things are that can cause you stress?
Look, the most consistent... again, if you've been a long-term entrepreneur, I guess to some extent you're used to the stress, right? Used to not having any money, and you're used to, having to bootstrap and all of those things, right? But I think ultimately, if I was born in a different century, I probably would have been an inventor or something. I think that that desire to create something that makes a difference, the desire to do things that the normal, run of the normal treadmill of business doesn't allow you to do. So if you want to be on the bleeding edge of this stuff, generally speaking, unless you work for a company like Google where it's in their DNA, generally speaking, you have to do it on your own.
You are listening to Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core.
I'm just thinking that the inventors, like if you look into the history, the inventors and futurist people at the edges, not easy, right? Like moving the boundaries of society, of, the perceptions, breaking the boxes. What now, moving towards the raw part, I'm just curious, right? Being an inventor yourself, being an outlier, if I can call you that way, what are the hardships? Tell us a little bit more about that. What were the dips on your Bread King journey?
I'm fortunate that I haven't had businesses that have outright failed, but I have had businesses where we had massive disruptions and where I've come extremely close to losing it all, if it didn't go one way or the other. And, if you listen to Elon Musk, you listen to Richard Branson, all entrepreneurs that have been in the space tell those sort of stories where I came this close, to a funding moment, where whatever, and made it. So I think there's definitely those pieces. Probably if I look at emotionally, the toughest times, 2003, starting a small office in Hong Kong and starting a business, then bang, SARS hits and all of the consulting work that we had dried up. That was a real test of mettle. Similarly in Dubai, when the financial crisis hit, we had a very, at the training business was generating about 5 million in revenue annually. It was a very positive business. The following year, it went down to 300,000. So 2008, 5 million in revenue. 2009, about 350,000 in revenue. I mean, that's a 90% contraction almost. So those sort of changes are very difficult to manage because you don't have cash reserves. You tend to run, maybe with 3 to 6 months runway for most, small businesses that you have. And so it was pretty tough. And then I had a US partner at the time, and the US partner was over leveraged. So when the stock market dipped, this guy just lost it. And he was, unfortunately for us, he was a lawyer. And he decided to start suing everybody and trying to take over the business aggressively, from a legal standpoint, which basically destroyed the business overnight and took us about a year to recover from that. That was brutal, going through a legal battle like that against a lawyer, who was trying to, destroy my reputation.
What was happening for you at that moment? I'm curious. And you talk a little bit about that on the emotional level.
So you can imagine the middle of a legal battle, having to move from, your home of 5 years. We quite like Dubai, and that put enormous emotional pressure on, and sleepless nights and stuff like that. It wasn't just the fact that we were facing a lawsuit. I'd faced legal action before, and as an entrepreneur, you get used to managing contractual disputes and things like that more effectively than I think someone in a corporate environment. But the fact that this guy was going after me on the web, attacking my reputation and making outrageous claims like that I was involved in money laundering and fraud and things like this, just as a lever, because he wanted to use that as a lever to get me to cave in respect to the business that we had operating in Dubai. But that was massively stressful, created a lot of pressure on my marriage at the time and things like that. So that was tough. I think that's probably the toughest time I've been through. With moving, we've had tough times on the financing side a couple of times. We just before we did our Series A round, we basically, we had a fairly small team, about 20 people, but we weren't going to make payroll. And so I had to go out on the road and do a bunch of speaking gigs just to make payroll for the team and things like that, So there's been, that's run of the mill for a lot of entrepreneurs in this space. So there's been those elements, and those elements are certainly stressful, but I think when you sign up as an entrepreneur, you are prepared to some extent to do that. And if you can solve those problems, if you can get through those issues, obviously it makes you stronger and more resilient as a business overall. But, it's also tough on staff in that situation. Obviously, as a founder, and at the time I was still CEO of the business, you don't expose the staff to all of that risk, but that's a challenge as well. So
maybe we can go a little bit into what you just said, because a lot of the entrepreneurs that we see, especially first-time entrepreneurs, actually don't really know what's going to hit them, and they're not prepared for it, right? So you use the word stressful quite a bit in describing the situations, but what does stressful actually mean? Is it sleepless nights? Is it anxiety? Is it, and not just what does it mean, but how, because you seem to be quite comfortable talking about it because you've come out of it. So do you have any mechanisms that you then apply to say, you know what, this is a really difficult time. I'm going to, exercise more or do whatever it is. What are the little kind of tricks that you have for yourself to, first of all, acknowledge it, and then secondly go, okay, I need to do something about it?
To be successful as an entrepreneur, you need that persistence. You need that belief that you can get through it. And so if you don't have that positive belief set that I can make this work, I will find a way to make this work, you'll just lie down and let the bulldozer roll over you, you know. And so I think when I'm going through these things, I'm constantly gaming in my head, how do I fix this? What are the options? That persistence, that absolute belief that you can make it work is critical.
So is it like I'm just imagining it's like a war of voices in your head? Is that how it manifests, or?
There's I think the best way to sort of describe this in terms of the way the internal conversation in my head goes is you have to become a little detached. You have to say, look, if this all falls apart, I'm just going to have to accept it. But I'm going to do everything in my power, as I live and breathe, to make this, do whatever I can to make this work. And you have to have that belief that you can get over the hump. You can do it. And so I think that's the core thing that probably differentiates entrepreneurs in that zone when there's a massive threat. You just have to give yourself almost no option. But it's at the back there, you're going to say, look, if this all falls apart, I'm just going to have to accept it and move on to the next thing. I've got a million other ideas I can tackle. So I think the first element is you try not to allow yourself to think of failure as a possibility, you know. You just keep working the options. Say, what's another way I can approach this? How do I save this? I can tell you, for example, when we had on our Series B round, we had all the investors lined up. It was a $12 million round. It was all set to go. A lead investor, the players involved in that had changed. The guy who sponsored the project had left, and the GP behind it wasn't as convinced, so the deal was a little shaky, and then on the day that all the money was supposed to fund, money coming into the bank account, one of the major investors, the cash didn't appear in the bank account. It was a strategic investor. I won't say who they are, and we called them up and said, hey, is there a problem? The money didn't hit the account today. And they said, yeah, our chief risk officer just decided to do a review on the fact that you've got Russian investors in the business, and we're putting it all on hold. And all the paperwork was done. This had been negotiated for months, And so then the whole consortium of investors threatens to fall apart as well. We can't get the cash that's in the bank account because it's under escrow, and so you just work the problem. So
how did you work that problem? Because this is exactly what people, like even our listeners and all those entrepreneurs we talk to, they're like, yes, I'm going through this resonates, I went through it. And you say, and then you work through it. How did you work through it?
Look, I think multiple times I've put my reputation on the line, and I've said, I've gone out. In this case, we went to some other investors that were connected with the group, and we said to them, guys, this is, we've got to get this over the line. We just need, at the time we needed to get it back over the 10 million mark. So we needed about $1 million in additional investment. So we just went to some of our existing investors and asked, and, I sort of put my butt on the line, and very fortunate to have, their support.
How important are other people for you in that context? Do you have something like a advisor network, like a personal advisor network, or a group of mentors, or people you go to when even you as like the superstar fintech person goes, I'm running out of options here, help me structure my thoughts?
Yeah, it's lonely at the top, as they say. It's lonely because as an entrepreneur, at that level as a founder, you tend to be on your own a lot. And there are some other founders you can talk to and sort of bounce off ideas, and there are some VCs you can talk to that are part of your network. But if there are other founders, they may be competitors, and so you don't want to necessarily disclose massive problems. But there are some founders I've learned to trust over the years. But you are on your own a lot when it comes to this as a founder, and so again, if the one quality of a founder that's really critical in this that you want to emphasize is persistence. That willpower and that persistence is absolutely critical to success. And so even at the point when it's getting really tough, you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your mission. And if you don't have that really strong, if you're opportunistic as an entrepreneur and you see other people making money out of this sector and you want to jump in and make money so you can have an exit, you're not going to be as resilient as someone who's come into it because they're passionate about the idea and they're, it's really, they're driven by this intent to change the world.
You are listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core.
It's interesting what you're just describing, because I ultimately stepped back from Startup Bootcamp and Rainmaking because I just lost faith after nearly 8 years trying to help change the industry by bringing in so many different angles and tools and talking to the right people within the banks. And at some point, I just realized that I was starting getting bitter. And I didn't really trust that the banks would actually do what I consider to be the right thing. And all the people I kind of trusted and valued, and I thought were the smart people, also thought is the right thing. So it's admirable to kind of for you to go back to this kind of built-in resilience, for want of a better word, and persistence. I needed to remove myself from my own sanity. I needed to stop talking to these people and actually also kind of move away from the fintech noise, because I didn't see that light. And for me, it's partly why we're doing this is because I think it's more important to find ways to support the entrepreneurs who do have that extra rocket inside them to go, I'm running low on energy. Let's just switch on these extra reserves. So you have something there.
Well, look, I have to say, during coronavirus right now, we had a funding round that disappeared, as a result of Corona. That is a challenge for us right now. And, whenever those sort of things happen, you do have a second think about it. Is it all worth it? Is there something else I could be doing? There's been many times where, I felt tired and I thought I need a break from this constancy. I've been running my own businesses now, pretty much all of my career, and most of the time it's been a pretty good environment. That as an entrepreneur, you generally work longer hours. You generally are much more emotionally committed to what you're doing. You can't just turn off when you go home from a 9-to-5 job, even though, at executive levels, or sort of, if I was to take an executive role at a corporate, obviously it wouldn't be just a 9-to-5 job. I'd be more engaged. But at the same time, you're not as emotionally, connected to it. If there's issues, then you just go out and find another job. Whereas, as an entrepreneur, the question over, if you walk away from the business and it fails because you're not involved in it, as an example, is that a failure for you? That's what's kept me involved in the business to date. So that's a very real concern I think many founders have, that that they're the magic ingredient. If they step away themselves, then what's going to happen? And so
you hear that very often, actually. Yeah. Frankly, I wanted to ask you, around this stepping out, right? So a lot of the founders share with us this concern around how can I step out with dignity, really? Yes. And what's my identity? Because I've been doing this for, the major part of my life. So who am I? Is that a question which, is on your mind, or?
No, I mean, for me, I guess that's where I'm in a fairly unique position, is that most people know me for a bunch of things, right? Running the radio show, doing the writing. I'm better known as an author than I am as the founder of Move-In, for example. And so, my identity as a thought leader or futurist in the space, I think, is sound whether Move-In survives or not, right? But having said that, there is an element to, I've had unique credibility as a writer in this space, as a futurist, predicting the future and building it. There's that great quote. I can't remember whose quote it is, but the best way to get to the future is to build it. So, a lot of the reasons I've been successful in my career as a speaker and a writer is I've been able to speak with great authority because I've been in the trenches every day, walking the walk, walking the talk. And so there's that, but then I do have that question is like, if Move-In fails, do people stop reading my books? And now I don't think that's realistic, because I think I've sort of gone beyond that. But at the same time, there's a little bit of that concern of the authenticity, of your message, and so
it still sounds to me, Brad, like such a solo write for you, like since the coder and we keep hearing this a lot, like the loneliness, which you've mentioned. I'm curious what role your personal life plays in this. Could you lean back on your family? Is that something which was a safe circle for you?
I think most people probably know in 2016 I went through a divorce. Most people that know me well. My ex never really got the whole entrepreneurial thing, saw the business as a competitor for her time and the children's time. And even if I had a full-time job, my profile in terms of time I spent working would have been very similar. So, look, instead of seeing it as this thing that gave us financial freedom and supported the family, it was the enemy. And so it was very, very tough. And I think that had come out of largely because of the, and this is, again, the impact of that legal issue I spoke about in 2009, with the American, legal partner. That sort of really burned her out, I think, and she was done with it all, and she just wanted me to just get a full-time job and just, not have the complexities of that. And I tried that for a little while and just didn't sit with me. And, when I started writing, again, she didn't think that the writing, she thought it was a joke. She said you'd be better off getting a job as a bus driver at the time than writing a book. Said I wouldn't make any money out of it. My dad said the same, actually. But I had this idea that I wanted to get some stuff on paper and help other struggling innovators within banks, particularly, to sort of do this. And so I went off in that direction. But I think she was pretty burned out by the whole issue in Dubai, and I think she sort of never really recovered from that, and so I couldn't get a lot of support from her. So that was pretty tough. I remarried since. My wife, she's a New Yorker. She's pretty resilient on that basis, but also she's a futurist, and so from a mindset perspective, we're definitely much more in the same mindset of where the world's going and what role that we should play in that. And so from it's chalk and cheese. It's from a support environment. It's completely a different environment for me, which, unfortunately, I still regret the fact that, I had to go through a divorce to find that support for me personally. And, I've got a reasonable relationship with my ex, and my children, from that. But, I don't know. It is a very lonely existence. I can't say that, it's not been my experience that, up until recently that the family's been that haven as an entrepreneur, but that's just my personal experience.
Yeah.
You want it raw. You got
Yeah,
it.
no, and thanks for sharing. Frankly, like I think it's one of the big myths that we like. It's kind of believed that the family is actually the support system, and more conversation we have, it just doesn't prove that it's the case for everybody. And
I can tell you, look, Alex Sion, who is my co-founder at Movement, Alex was a huge help during the early days of Movement. And then, on the speaking and the writing career side, for, about 8 years now, I've had the support of a guy called Jay Kemp, he's basically my manager on the speaking side. And the speaking business is a significant, business for us now, not only for me personally, but as we've now got multiple speakers like Jim Maroos and Ron Shevlin and Dave Birch and others in that team. But Jay has been Jay was super supportive through that whole time, and we became more than business partners. We became good friends because he was a guy that independently I could just go to and just tell him exactly how I felt and what was going wrong, and he wouldn't judge, and he'd be supportive. So Jay was huge in that. So I'll get him to listen to this interview and give him a shout out because he was a great help through that. So there have been people that have been there and had my back and supported me. But at the same time, I've had the other thing that I've had a unique privilege through this period, beyond just the entrepreneurship and the success of Movin', is that I've had success as a thought leader, as a writer, and so seeing entire companies building digital strategies based off what I've written in a book and telling me that, seeing a CEO of a bank come to me at an event or engage me to come and speak to their team and said he's made sure every one of the managers has got a copy of my book and read it, and it's changed his strategy for the bank. Those sort of things have been hugely empowering for me personally and have sort of kept the wind in my sails through this entire period. So, that I think there's a certain special success that comes, one as a founder, if you've been able to, prove your theories and get a business going and survive as long as we have for the last 10 years. But on a second piece of that, just being able to actually change the dialogue and conversation in the space, and me doing that. It's been hard work. I mean, every 18 months or so, I've churned out a book. It's getting harder to do that these days, just finding the time to do that. But having the success from that has been sort of a unique comfort for me. Is I must be doing something right,
You've had a long, successful, repeatable career as an entrepreneur. There are people who are listening to this who probably do this for the first time, and they're looking for something that will help them go through the difficult times. The persistence is an easy thing to articulate, but is there something underneath that you can kind of share that people can do as a tool to help them through the difficult moments?
Yeah, I think the mindset you have to have as an entrepreneur going into the business, even though you might fail, you have to have the mindset that nothing is going to stop me from making this happen. If there's one thing that I've seen from entrepreneurs that are successful, two things, right? Having a great idea that's really differentiated, that gives you an advantage. But the second is that you just don't allow yourself to think of failure, and so you have to go in with that mindset. If you go in with the mindset like, I want to see if I can make some money out of this and get an early exit, then I don't you might get lucky, right? But you don't see, I wouldn't be in this for 10 years if that was my mindset, because I haven't had an exit yet, so and you invest a lot of your time. I could have been earning a lot more money in the in the corporate sector as an employee consistently over these last 10 years. But I wouldn't have had the freedom to do a lot of the stuff I've had. I wouldn't be able to do the writing and the speaking and the radio show and the other
and
stuff.
The flying.
And the flying, yeah. That I had. So, it's a trade-off, but I think you must go into this with that view that nothing can stop me. And so you if that requires you to do some work on mental resilience and self-help, whether it's Tony Robbins or something like that, to get that belief set in your mind, to be able to do that, I think that's a core degree of success. But the other thing is, I think, and one thing entrepreneurs don't do enough is you have to celebrate every small success you have, right? Because if you look at it as the exit is the payoff and the exit is the real measure of success and you don't get there, you'll burn yourself out pretty quickly. So don't, think about every little win you have. When you close a funding round, celebrate it. When you get a new release out of the product out there that people go, wow, celebrate it. Whatever it is, you can take those wins away and use that to keep you fueled for the battle that is to come.
We're going to celebrate. We got Brett King on the podcast being raw. That's my small success. So Brett King, raw. I don't think that happens a lot. What did you take out of it?
Well, it's amazing to see somebody who is such a public figure kind of getting to the point, but it took a little bit, right? Getting to the point where he would actually talk about how his personal state was affected by the challenges that the business brought. And these are not necessarily the obvious ones, right?
Oh, yeah. The myth, for me was like, hell yeah. I mean, it needs to be talked more about, because I think we just somehow assume that for majority of people, there is this partner, there is the family support. And then I have a feeling now that more we talk to people, we actually realizing that it is not given at all. And so for me, it was a big time, and I'm grateful that he actually was open about it with the people. So hopefully it adds some value.
Brett did bring in a new perspective, because sometimes when we talk about lack of support, that's something we've acknowledged already, but he used the word antagonizing. So having actually somebody who to some extent is putting pressure on you, not just saying I'm not supporting you, but saying actually I will ask for as much attention as the business or more, that puts extra pressure on you. So I thought that was an interesting kind of perspective. It's interesting when you see somebody who is just very successful, but at the same time, very much a name, as in you identify the person and you realize that it's not a co-founder team. It's not we did this.
The solo ride.
Yeah, so there was something about, and we haven't really spent a lot of time talking to single founders who built a business by themselves. I mean, by maybe finding co-founders, but ultimately becoming the face of the business, right?
Yeah. What can we take out of this as a practical kind of learning? And when he was talking a lot, Brett was sharing with us about this talk and the mindset. And sometimes for me, that's really still hard to grasp in terms of how do I turn that into a practical habit? Is it I'm calling myself out? And particularly, I think when you're a solo founder, it can be challenging, because I was just thinking, are you blocked within your own mind for a long time? And then even Brett said it on the podcast, like, now I think I overthink this, or I'm overthinking. Do you do this for yourself, or how does that work for you?
I think my lesson of this particular conversation was introspection. I never struggled with the question of mindset. I always had this comfort of, I'm going to do this. So ultimately, I came into this with this mindset whenever I started something. It was more, for me, was this recognition that I need to learn to ask for help in the right moments. So I think for me, the biggest learning out of this is that it's one of the elements. And if you have it, then maybe this episode will not teach you that. It will teach you something else. Just like other episodes may open your mind and your eyes to something that you don't have. This is one of them. You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm. where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Turgel, coordinating producer Alena Zamirova, and edited by Catherine Volker.
And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world.